You know, in a world that often feels so divided, how do we connect what we believe in our hearts with real, meaningful action for those in need? Well, a new papal document, Dilexi Te, offers a really powerful answer. It's basically a guide for one of the biggest challenges for any person of faith, bridging that gap between what we believe and how we serve. So let's dive in and explore the path it lays out for us. Let's start with this quote from Pope St. John Paul II, because it gets right to the heart of the problem Dilexi Te is trying to solve. He's talking about a throwaway culture where we've just gotten used to indifference. It's like the whole system is set up in a way that makes it harder for us to truly see each other, to connect, and to establish solidarity. So the big question is, how do we break through that alienation? Okay, so before we can even talk about a solution, the document insists that we first have to understand the real nature of the problem. And that starts with understanding what poverty really is. And right off the bat, Dilexi Te just blows up our typical definition of poverty. It's so much more than just a lack of money. I mean, think about it. What about the person who's socially invisible, who's marginalized and has no voice? Or the person who's cut off from cultural resources, or who's been stripped of their basic human rights and freedom? This document challenges us to see all the different ways that human dignity can be wounded. So once we have this bigger, broader understanding of what poverty is, the document frames its answer. And it's not a list of rules, it's a direct message of love. And honestly, it has a really beautiful origin story. So here it is. This is the apostolic exhortation Dilexi Te. Now, this is a major teaching document from the Pope, and the story behind it is pretty fascinating. It was actually started by Pope Francis in his final months, and then it was completed and signed by his successor, Pope Leo XIV. I mean, that's a powerful example of continuity, a real passing of the torch on an issue that's at the absolute heart of the faith. Okay, and the title itself, Dilexi Te, it's so important. It means I have loved you. And it's taken straight from the book of Revelation, where Christ is speaking to this community that's poor, they're powerless, and they're facing contempt. And he says to them, I have loved you. So by choosing this title, the Pope is framing this entire teaching not as a lecture, but as Christ's own words of love and dignity spoken directly to the most vulnerable among us. And that message of love brings us right to the theological core of this document. And it's an idea that's, well, it's both incredibly simple and totally radical. And here it is. This is the absolute bombshell of the whole document. Our faith in God and our service to the poor, they're not two separate boxes you can check off on a spiritual to-do list. The document argues they are a single, unified act. You literally cannot have one without the other. And to make this crystal clear, the document uses this really intense image. When we serve someone in need, we are reaching out to touch the suffering flesh of Christ. This just totally flips the script on charity. It's no longer some detached act of giving something. It becomes this deeply personal, urgent encounter with God himself. So this leads to a pretty challenging question that the document keeps coming back to. It brings up the parable of the Last Judgment from Matthew 25 over and over. You know, that's the one where Jesus says we'll be judged on how we treated the hungry, the thirsty, the prisoner. It's basically asking us to consider that the real final test of our faith isn't just about what's in our heads, but how we actually treat people in need. Okay, so if faith and action are this inseparable pair, what does that actually look like in real life? Well, Dilexi Te is super clear about this, and it pushes back against a couple of common but incomplete ideas. Yeah, it basically warns us about two major pitfalls. On one hand, you've got what it calls pietism without action. You know the type. It's a faith that's all private, just between you and God, but it never actually goes anywhere or does anything for anyone else. It just kind of dries up. And on the other hand, you have activism without faith. This is social work that's completely cut off from its spiritual heart. And the risk there is that it just becomes another nonprofit, another NGO. So Dilexi Te insists it's not either or, it's both and. Prayer has to fuel our service, and our service has to deepen our prayer. They feed each other. And look, this whole both and thing isn't some brand new idea they just came up with. The document points way back to the ancient monastic tradition. Things like quiet prayer in a cell and active care in a hospital. They were never seen as opposing forces. They were always understood to be two sides of the same coin, woven together into a single spiritual fabric. All right, so this all sounds great in theory, but what does this integrated faith and action look like for us right now? Well, the document gives us two really clear, connected paths for putting this love into practice. First, there's the path of personal encounter. This is all about giving what it calls loving attentiveness. This is where those small acts of kindness become huge. The document really tries to reclaim the idea of almsgiving. It's not just dropping a few coins in a cup. It's a chance to actually stop, to look someone in the eye, and to recognize their shared humanity. And then there's the second path, structural change. This calls us to go beyond just those one-on-one acts. It's about calling out the unjust systems that create and sustain poverty. It's about making our voices heard and supporting those popular movements that are fighting for justice at the root. The point is, our response has to be both personal and systemic.
And this brings us to the final challenge from Dilexi Te, and honestly, it might be the most profound one of all. This right here, this is a total mind-bender. It completely flips our usual script on charity. The document says that the poor are not just objects for our charity, passive recipients of our help. No, they are active subjects. They have a kind of mysterious wisdom, and they have something to teach us. We have to, and I quote, let ourselves be evangelized by them. Think about that. In that encounter, it's often the person who thinks they're doing the giving who ends up being the one who is truly changed. And so, in the end, Dilexi Te leaves us with this direct, unmistakable command from the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's not just a nice thought, it's not a suggestion, it is a mandate. Go and do likewise. So it leaves us with a really simple but massive question. If our faith really is inseparable from the poor, what are we going to do about it?